Operation Bolivar was a German espionage operation in Latin America during World War II under the control of the Foreign Security Service, which is basically the SS intelligence section, and it was primarily concerned with the collection and transmission of clandestine information from Latin America to Europe during the war. Although Nazi Germany saw some success, such as creating a courier system involving the use of Spanish merchant vessels for shipment of paper-form intelligence, the operation would end up a huge failure for them and a large success for the Allied powers throughout the war. Starting with Argentina, which was the country that was at most risk for joining the Axis powers during the war, and the country that would become famous for hosting Nazi war criminals after World War II. Argentine naval officer Osmar Alberto Helmuth would coordinate with Hans Harzenash, who claimed to be a personal representative of Heinrich Himmler, and had extensive contacts within the Argentine government. As a result of negotiations between the two, which would also include Argentine President Pedro Pablo Ramirez as well as various other cabinet ministers, Helmuth would be appointed Argentine consul in Barcelona. This appointment served to cover his actual mission for the Germans, which was to protect German forces and to assure that the country of Argentina had no intentions of severing relations with Nazi Germany. His mission also was to have him confer with the security service and other German officials on matters of mutual interest, and was to obtain German permission for the return to Argentina from Sweden on the Argentine tanker Buenos Aires, which would be carrying a load of German-supplied weapons for further German incursions. Most of the details and planning of this operation were known by the Allies through intercepted radio traffic. Osmar Alberto Helmuth would then be arrested on November 4th, 1943. Argentina, however, made a formal protest to the British. When the ramifications of the affair were learned, however, there was a change in their position. The Argentine Minister of Foreign Affairs instructed his ambassador in London on December 17th to inform the British that Helmuth's appointment had been cancelled, and that if the British would release him, then his letters patent would also be cancelled, and the British could do with him as they saw fit, because, they decided it was pretty bad to have a Nazi sympathizer with them. Furthermore, in early 1946, when the U.S. State Department was preparing a case against the Peronista government of Argentina regarding its wartime support for the Axis, the State Department had requested to use clandestine information that was intercepted during Operation Bolivar, and this would be the operation's final contribution towards the Allied cause, where the clandestine information and communications would be fused with further information from other sources in preparing an indictment against the government. Regarding Chile and Operation Bolivar, the Nazis sought to maintain the neutrality of Chile's copper production, as well as to keep the whole country neutral and not to sever relations with Nazi Germany. However, that wouldn't really go as planned. As a result of information collected by the American counterintelligence agencies and with information given to the Chilean government by the State Department, a large number of more active Nazi agents in Chile would be arrested in the fall of 1942. However, enough would escape in order to reform some of their networks. When von Bohlen went back to Germany in late 1943, his group would be sufficiently well organized so that he could leave it be, with a small number of equipment and money that would be in the hands of the Germans, who would carry on operations until February of 1944. Paraguay would also be a significant hub for German espionage throughout Operation Bolivar. However, by 1942, pressure on the Paraguayan government had forced the Paraguayans to sever relations with Germany, as the country increasingly relied upon the United States for economic support. Furthermore, Paraguay would become a major refugee hub for major Nazi war criminals, just like Argentina did. In Brazil, the Nazis had set up 4 clandestine radio stations, each serving a different spy net, which began operations in 1941. In May, Rio de Janeiro's radio station started communicating with Germany. The Lermax group, as it was called, eventually expanded to operate in Brazil as well as in Argentina, Uruguay, and Ecuador. It centered on commercial information services. Regarding Mexico, between 1940 and 1942, the Nazis organized an extensive network which maintained contact with other spy rings in South America and would attempt to obtain information from within the United States. While technical data from the American publications would be extracted or photographed, and some general information was obtained from contacts within the U.S., there's no real evidence that the Germans were successful in obtaining vital military secrets in Mexico. Additionally, they would be successful in leaving behind a nucleus of German organizations which would be able to maintain minor activities. Finally, German espionage activities in Cuba was rather minor compared to other aspects of Operation Bolivar, despite Cuba's mass importance to the Allied war effort, and it would be eliminated by the American counterintelligence forces before it could be effective part of the Bolivar network. First, to establish a clandestine radio station in Cuba, the Abwehr sent Hans Lunin to Havana, who was a pretty incompetent spy because he failed to master the basics of espionage. One example of this is that he was never able to even get his radio working correctly. Additionally, he did not understand how to use the secret ink he was supplied, and he missed drop boxes. Part of this is possibly due to the fact that Lunin was an anti-Nazi who was put in this espionage positions, but it could have also been because he was naturally incompetent. Overall, the information collected during Operation Bolivar is believed to have actually been more useful to the Allies than to the Axis powers, who intercepted much of the secret transmissions. Additionally, the operation had the effect of swaying key power brokers of the region out of neutrality and into the American sphere of influence, such as Mexico and Brazil, but also has strategically positioned nations producing much-needed goods, such as Venezuela, Chile, Peru, and Colombia, to be more so pro-US because, they really didn't like the fact that the Germans were spying on them. Keep in mind, this video has not been about Latin America during World War II, nor about what each country did in fighting the war, or even about what happened throughout the war in Latin America. It's mostly just been about Operation Bolivar and not other intelligence and espionage operations in Latin America. This is of course just a brief summary of Operation Bolivar. What did you think? Is there anything that I left out or should have talked more about? Write in the comments, and thank you for watching.